When people think of the food of Heston Blumenthal, dishes like snail porridge and meat fruit come to mind. But the sound of the sea crystallises everything about Heston's approach to food and eating. The diner is presented with a wooden box filled with sand, topped with a glass lid. On top of the glass is a sea scene in microcosm. Edible sand, seashells, shellfish and sea foam make the plate of food. But in addition, they receive a conch shell. Inside this shell is an iPod. In the headphones, the final element, the literal sound of the sea. The diner will hear waves crashing, seagulls, distant chatter, all in the service of bringing back powerful memories of playing on the beach, summer holidays, being with friends and family. That sound, along with taste, sight and smell, bound together, creates powerful emotions. The sound of the sea is the ultimate representation of Heston Blumenthal's style of cookery. Heston has been tinkering with the concept of sound affecting eating food for a long time. Professor Charles Spence, Professor of Experimental Psychology at Oxford University, demonstrated different experiments on how different stimuli affected the perception of eating. Participants were given Heston's bacon and egg ice cream and had to listen to either bacon sizzling or chickens clucking. Depending on which sample they listened to, either the egg or bacon flavour became more pronounced in their head, despite the fact it was the same food. In another test, assistants ate oysters while listening to sea sounds or farmyard sounds. Unsurprisingly, oyster plus sea was deemed saltier and more enjoyable, and the kernel of the sound of the sea dish was born. By 2007, the iPod had become ubiquitous enough, and wearing headphones for a sole dish in a long tasting menu didn't feel as antisocial as it had years before. This dish was a game changer, because it showed me food has the ability to create so much happiness with nostalgia. Is there anything I can do as a chef to nurture that?
So I'm going to attempt to make Heston Blumenthal's Sound of the Sea. It's an unusual dish and I'm going to attempt to recreate it. Of course, most importantly, I'm going to eat it and use the headphones and listen to the sounds of the sea. Clues in the name, I guess. I'm going to attempt to make it exactly as is in the Fat Duck Cookbook, a non too small size of the bloody thing, a non too small book containing a large number of the dishes cooked at the Fat Duck. Here's exactly how the recipe looks in the page. So I'm going to cook it as accurately to that recipe as I can. I did a lot of research before attempting this. I'm really indebted to the blog The Big Fat Undertaking, a great guy who cooked every dish in this book. The guy's insane. But he had some concessions that he made to the dish, basically because they were incredibly difficult to find or they were incredibly expensive. Very expensive in some cases. So there's a few ingredients I couldn't quite get hold of. Brown carbonised vegetable powder, white soy sauce, Codium CPP seaweed, sodium caseinate, dulse seaweed. I'm also doing one major shortcut. The dish technically takes 1 month, but a month of that is brewing a ponzu. I think there's so many good ponzus available now that I've chosen just to buy one. A Kikkoman lemon ponzu. So I'm going to attempt to cook that now. Now this isn't going to be a sort of follow along recipe and hey, pause it and add miso the same time I add miso. I'm just going to take you through some of the stages. You can look up the recipe yourself online. It's very easy to find. It's a lot of work and a lot of ingredients. And I'm doing it just for the exploration of it, just to further understand exactly what the dish is about and get a little bit closer to Heston's mindset going through this dish. But let's have a look, see how it goes.
So here's my box of ingredients I've been collecting for this recipe. And we've got seaweeds, we've got soy sauces, we've got vegetables, we've got all sorts of things. But I tell you one thing we do need, and that's some fish.
I've come to Mersea Island in the very north tip of Essex, said to be home to some of the best seafood in the country, particularly the oysters. I've been to the local fishmonger, who were very helpful. Now I'm going to go to the company's shed, which is always touted as a great place to eat. Mersea sits just above the river Blackwater. That is where the Malden Salt Company draws its salt from. So it's a place steeped in rich fishing tradition, and a must-see for people looking for seafood experiences. And I'm hoping to get some ingredients here today that's going to help me complete and be the centrepiece of the sound of the sea. As I sit here by the sea, eating seafood, it just all makes sense. It's December, it's about 6 degrees, but I can hear seagulls, I can hear the clank of boat equipment. I'm just looking out over the Blackwater Creek. Something about the place that makes it by being here. It's cold though. So let's start making the actual dish. First of all, a couple of days before, making some miso oil. That's white miso and red miso, drizzled on a little oil, and we leave it to steep for a couple of days. Quite a simple one. Now this is a pickling liquor for the seaweed. White wine vinegar, rice wine vinegar, water, sugar and salt. I couldn't find this seaweed, so I'm using kale today. And then to strain off my miso oil, I'm going to use a V60. Coffee fans will know this one, just a filter paper and just popping that in so all the bits don't come through. Now for the edible sand. In the bowl I've already got konbu and panko breadcrumbs, and I'm just going to crush them together. In hindsight, I probably should have just used a mini chopper or mini blender to do that. That would have actually given a better result. And now shirasu, which took a little finding, dried anchovies, baby anchovies. I'm just frying those for a couple of minutes until golden brown. This is a little blue shimmer powder, the type you find for cakes, just stirring some of that through, and crushing a couple of ice cream cones into it as well, and then blend with a little oil. Just thought I'd give that a try. And it's really tasty. It surprises me. It goes in all sorts of directions. It's salty and it's sweet and it's savoury, and actually one of the best parts of the finished dish. Now some hijiki seaweed, marinated in a little ponzu and mirin. And this is going to form the base of the majority of the seafood cooking. So there's carrots and onions and fennel and leek and shallots and garlic and white wine and vermouth. And I've put into here cockles and mussels. And I'm just simmering that all gently together. And I'm going to add some parsley and konbu to boost the savoury and sea notes of that dish. Now to strain off all of that mixture, we're essentially making a sort of fish stock here, a very super powered fish stock, and that fish stock is going to make the basis for the sea in the dish. One thing, and I've forgotten this about some Heston recipes, it can be very wasteful. So it doesn't actually say what you do with all that stuff that's in the sieve. So put that into a pie dish, added some mashed potato and made a fish pie. Very good it was too. This is the liquor that's strained off, this very murky brown liquid, which I'm just going to season with some ponzu, salt and pepper,
This has extraordinary depth of flavour. All those vegetables, all that seafood, it's created a really tasty broth. Here's some soy lecithin. Much more easier to buy than it sounds. You can get them in food shops like Holland and Barrett, also very easily available online. If I just use a hand blender now, you can see that it's forming a huge amount of foam, and the soy lecithin acts as a thickening agent and traps the foam bubbles so that you get that, well, frankly, sea foam look. So even after blending, that foam retains its head. Okay, now dried lily bulbs, another one I found very hard to get hold of, but these turned out to be super tasty. Available in a pack, just blanched in the microwave and reconstituted the same way you'd reconstitute dried mushrooms. Now onto my Mersea oyster. What a specimen this was. I don't think I'd ever opened an oyster before. I've seen it been done on telly a lot, but I don't think I've ever done it. So I've probably lost a load of marks and a load of followers from the way I dissected that oyster, but it came apart cleanly and it didn't leave much on the shell, so I was pretty happy with that. Okay, now it's time to plate. So here comes my edible sand. Again, really wishing I'd blended it to a fine powder using a mini chopper or food processor so that it was completely combined. Absolutely everything combined into it. Adding some of the dried lily bulbs. These have got a lovely taste. They're sort of sweet, a bit like a nut, like a cashew. Very hard to describe. But they just go onto the sand and they look like a seashell. That's the job they're trying to do. Just dotting a few on there just to make it look nice. My seaweed, or kale in this case, that's been marinated in a sort of a pickling liquor, so it's got a sharp flavour. Just a few pieces there again to provide contrast against the fish. Now just placing on some of the hijiki seaweed, which has got a tougher, chewier texture. It's got quite a bite to it, so we're just layering on different textures here. And some samphire. I always forget how much I enjoy samphire. This is straight from the packet, straight onto the plate. It's so crunchy and tasty and salty. Samphire's great. It just looks really good in this type of dish too. Now some reserved shellfish from earlier. A few cockles, a few mussels. The type of fish it kind of doesn't matter. Growing up in Essex as I did, going to the cockle sheds at Lee was a big part of my childhood. So using cockles and mussels here seemed really appropriate. There's my oyster. Taking some of that liquor, that broth from earlier, and drizzling that over for that sea effect. And there's the finished dish. The sound of the sea.
So after a fair bit of cooking, a lot of processes, a lot of shopping, here it is. The sound of the sea. Making it run a little bit, but that's okay. Now, obviously, the point of doing all this is, yes, it is about the food, but it's also about the sound. Now, I don't have an iPod, but I've got a tablet here with the sound that they use at the Fat Duck restaurant. So I'm just going to pop this in and eat my lunch. So, having made, eaten, the sound of the sea dish, and the actual what am I thinking? It's a bit confusing. So I've spent several hours making the dish, combining all those elements, putting the sand on the plate, getting the fish right, stewing the fish, simmering the fish, creating the seawater, going out to Mersea to get some great shellfish, and then sitting down to eat it. What do I think now? Is it the best thing I've ever eaten? No, not the best thing I've ever eaten. It was really nice, very tasty, and there are actually things I'll take away from it. The sand itself was absolutely delicious. It's a bit sweet, it's a bit savoury. Mixing up a waffle cone, an ice cream cone, with savoury elements like seaweed is fantastic, really tasty. I'll be doing that again. That would work really well as like a crumble topping on a savoury dish. The foam was lots of fun, again really tasty. And drizzling the fish pieces in ponzu it gives it a real zing, a real lift. Imagine putting both lime and soy sauce on something at the same time, just a very concentrated amount, and it's really tasty. Again, one worth doing, particularly on shellfish and whitefish. So another one I'll be doing again. In fact, some years ago I attempted something I called beached salmon, which I'll link to down below, which was a very, very simplified strip, but it's the sound. It's impossible to put across on a video how that works, but the sound added to what you're eating just transport you. I grew up near the sea. I'm very lucky to have grown up quite near the sea, and I've spent a lot of time not that far from the ocean, so I spend a lot of time walking along, of eating, of sitting, just enjoying being by the sea. And it really does bring you back to those places. You know, the sounds of seagulls cawing away, making a racket is genuinely really evocative to me of my childhood. So when a dish can do that, the classic cliche example is of course the restaurant critic Ego in the film Ratatouille, and he suddenly tastes something that catapults him back to childhood. And I know that's what Heston's often trying to do. His entire tasting menu at the Fatback is about nostalgia and childhood imagery. I've got a whole chunk about that in my biography on Heston up there. So the sound of the sea dish, an absolutely fascinating experiment. One I'm pleased to have tried. I probably won't try it again, but I'm going to pick out elements of it and put it on other dishes. I hope you enjoyed that. That was a real fun experiment for me. Continuing my series looking at the key dishes of Heston Blumenthal. There are more of them in playlists down there somewhere. If you enjoyed that, please hit the like button. If you know other people who are a bit mad about restaurant dishes and chefy dishes, I'd love it if you could share it with them, send them a link. Equally, if you could subscribe, helps me out enormously. Thank you so much. See you next time.